Hello, I'm Eagle Gardens 1 on Instagram, and this is fucking talking shit with Eagle, episode 512. I've got an extra special guest for us tonight, the Humboldt grower, or the Humboldt local on Instagram. I'm so sorry for messing that up. Joey, how you doing this evening? You want to tell us correctly how we can find you and how you're doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Eagle. Thanks for having me on here. Always a pleasure to talk with passionate ganja heads. So appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I'm the Humboldt local on Instagram. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I've also got a Patreon, patreon.com/the Humboldt local. Put a lot of educational content up there, and you can follow me along and see what I'm doing up there.
You've been dropping a lot of knowledge lately. I've been following on the hash tip, the outdoor hash tips, of course, all the great information you dropped on us through the organic takeover. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better tonight. Of course, I was very impressed during the takeover. Somebody that smoked some cannons one after another, like I do myself. I was greatly impressed in that ability alone. So I'm looking forward to hanging out tonight. What do you got in that one you just rolled?
Well, this is the time of year where you can either smoke the fresh weed and kill yourself, which is what I've mostly been doing, or you can smoke some year-old weed and also kind of kill yourself a little bit. So I'm smoking a little of both. So you got to mix a little of the old and a little of the new. So this has a little Black Domino by Sour D by Sour Cherry Sherb by my friend Kush Kirk up at the Garden of Greece up in Oregon, grower and hash maker and part of the Dragonfly Earth Medicine family. And then crossed with a little Citrino OG. This is a friend Samara made. Highly inspired organic takeover recently. Healed Life Gardens. So she took a strain of mine called the Citrino OG. That's an African orange by Tahoe OG by Deadhead OG. And she works with a lot of CBD and crossed it to a Ringo's Gift and made this citrine gift, she calls it. So a little bit of that, a little bit of high CBD in there, and that's the year-old weed. So we'll see how it does. I've been smoking a lot of fresh herb, and it's just been killing my lungs. But you got to do it, man. It's too hard. It's too tempting, you know.
Yeah, I agree. It's very tempting anytime the fresh flavors come in, and especially if you've been sitting on an year-old harvest. I can see you wanting to pluck a few off and just tasting of something a little bit different. I don't blame you at all.
Well, I actually
So
stuck some buds in the freeze dryer the other day and freeze dried some flower, which was an interesting little project. I'd smoked a couple freeze dried flowers. I'd never tried to do any myself. And yeah, you got to cut them down pretty small to fit them in those freeze dryer trays. But yeah, it ran a normal program just like I would with bubble hash, and the herb comes out interesting. It was still a little too wet. I tried to do a second batch and it didn't really work out either because my pump kind of gave out. I'm having issues with the freeze dryer right now. But yeah, that freeze dried herb is interesting, man. I think if you could get it right, there's something to it. You can really preserve the terpenes. The color looks really pretty. It's pretty wild.
if I can remember correctly, it looks fresh. It stays looking pretty like green almost. The flower does, but does it?
Yeah.
How is it as far as like breaking up? Does it crumble? Is it still somewhat scissorable
No.
after it comes out?
No, it has a really weird consistency. I like to use scissors to break my weed up to smoke a joint, and it feels like you're cutting like like soggy styrofoam or something. It is so weird. So maybe if I can get it more dry, because the batch I did, it's not dry enough that you can really smoke it. It kind of crumbles apart while the joint's burning and wants to kind of fall out of the joint and run a little bit. Like it's sloppy. So I'm gonna play around with it some more. Like I said, I'm having problems with the freeze dryer right now, which I know it's a similar problem that a lot of people have. It's basically the harvest right freeze dryers, and they'll say that you're not getting suction, you're not getting good vacuum, and meanwhile your material's all in there, all frozen up. And so I had couple days where I'm trying to get this freeze dryer to freeze this little bit of herb, freeze dry this little bit of herb, and I finally just dumped it out because I'm leaving the hill for a couple of days tomorrow. So I wanted to just kind of empty this freeze dryer out. So we lost a couple of ounces that we had in there, just a couple different flavors we're looking forward to test driving. But yeah, if you could get those settings right, it could be a fun little way to instantly test some herb, to literally, be fun to have some friends over and they pick out a bud and let them smoke it the next day. So I haven't quite got those settings right yet, but if anybody's had some good experience freeze drying herb, hit me up on Instagram. Let's talk.
You said something else already that made me like you a little bit more, and that's you were a scissor man there. Why do you prefer the scissors? I mean, tell me, let me in on that a little bit.
More just the grinders gum up and get real dirty and harder to clean. And the scissors, I don't know, just used to it. I did cut my thumb pretty good today. I mean, you space out for a second, you cut yourself and that'll wake you back up, but it happens. Then you got to try to roll the joint really quick before you start bleeding. Smoking by myself, though, so it's no big deal.
I think for me, it's the grinder grinds it up too much, and I'm kind of noted as saying, we've worked this hard on getting the flower to taste the best we can get it, and have as many trichomes on there. Why do I want to just obliterate that flower and then knock half the trichomes off it and into my keef catcher there, when I would rather have all that in my joint? I'm not trying to make hash for later. I'm trying to, enjoy the flower now. So I just feel like just chopping it up is kind of leaving it a little bit more chunky. Just for me, makes it better. So glad to see you're like along that line. So where we start things here is right off from the bat, man. When did cannabis enter your life? When was the first time that you used cannabis, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, first time I started using it was 12 years old, but I grew up here in Humboldt County. And so my parents weren't growers, though. They had founded this massage school here, this little intentional community massage school that would have about 100 residents at a time. And it's surrounded by growers. I was born up here in '82. So that was just when campaign against marijuana planting, the state-funded effort against marijuana was just starting. And, this was a grow neighborhood. This still is a grow neighborhood. And so cannabis was all around me. My friends, all their parents were growers. I'd be at their houses and there'd be weed hanging from the ceiling, and there'd be helicopters flying every summer. There would be convoys of law enforcement with, military gear and guns. And when they would come and raid the neighborhood, everybody would drive up onto the county road. You wouldn't want to be home. Because they were kicking in doors and they were confiscating stuff and they were arresting people. They were seizing land back then. If you got caught growing on your land, they might give you the choice of doing a year in jail or losing your land. Some friends of mine, their dad did a year in jail instead of losing his land. So, you know, it was very risky back then. That's why prices were so high, you know. So once I started smoking it, it was like, oh, okay. You know, suddenly everything was revealed to me that this is, you know, all the pieces came together when the older brothers started giving all us little young cats, you know, kickdowns and stuff. And we started figuring out whose parents had the good weed, and we want to go start hanging out at their house, you know. So by the time I was 13, I was helping my older friends hike water, 5-gallon water jugs onto the Bureau of Land Management land to the guerrilla gardens. This is where people would grow. You wouldn't grow on your own land because you'd get busted and go to jail. You would do these guerrilla patches way out on the federal land. And you know, weed was $5 grand a pound then. If you pulled a few pounds, you were crushing it. You know, this was mid 90s. This was, you know, 94, 95, 96, right around then, before medical came here in 96. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to it. It was exciting, you know, for a young kid, you know, being indoctrinated into the community and into the culture here, and really just getting to dive into it head first was a real fun time. It was a real rush, you know. You're running around in the woods, you're wearing camouflage, you're hiding from the helicopters. I mean, there were times we literally hid in the bushes from law enforcement. There were times, you know, I got camped at 15 was the first time I got busted. So yeah, it was the Wild West, man. It was a wild time. You know, ripoffs were real dangerous, and you'd be out there in the fall with a gun, sleeping out there in the woods, protecting your crop. I mean, it was the real deal. Burying miles of water line into the woods, hiking nutrients and amendments and soil deep into the woods, putting pots and trees up in the tops of trees so the deer wouldn't eat them, and so, you know, law enforcement wouldn't find them. We're putting drip systems in and running drip up into trees and having all these plants and pots up in the trees on drip. I mean, this was the kind of stuff we were doing it as teenagers. So it was fun, man. I loved it. And I had some really good mentors around me right then. And, you know, I dropped out of school young. I dropped out of school when I was 15 and did a couple of years of independent study where I would just do 1 day a week in town and the rest of my work on the hill, which I could knock out real easy and just work in the neighborhood. And back then, there was no hiring people you didn't know. So this was a very tight community. You literally didn't come up the road unless you knew people. People would stop you and say, "Who are you? Where the hell are you going?" And get the fuck out of here. And there was no buying land up here. Everything was held. Everything was either a friend of a friend. You know, it was really tightly controlled. So it was hard to find people to work. So I, you know, being born here, everybody knew me because I grew up at Hartwood at massage school in the neighborhood. Everybody knew I wasn't a cop. Oh, it was easy to give me, you know, get work when I was young and get schooled by these people that had been at it for a long time, and was fortunate to have some OGs, you know, teach me some things. And at the same time that the guerrilla patches were going on, people were growing in the full sun in their veggie gardens, doing a similar technique to scrog, the screen of green, but we would call it tie down, where we would lay chicken wire and lay fencing down on the ground. You'd actually plant your plant laying on the ground and tie it all down. And so these women that were teaching me this were amazing gardeners, because you had to be an amazing gardener to hide those plants. You'd grow flowers all on the north and the east side of them, tall flowers, sunflowers and amaranths and zinnias and cosmos and tobacco and all these incredible plants. So at the same time I was learning to grow the ganj, I was learning to grow these flowers and veggies and all these amazing companion plants, and seeing that these ladies didn't have any pest problems in their gardens, and they were amazing breeders. They were teaching me to make seeds, and yeah, amazing people. And at the same time, I was getting exposed to permaculture. They were teaching permaculture classes here at Hartwood in the 90s. Permaculture is a design system developed by an Australian named Bill Mollison in the 70s. And it's basically a system of ethics and principles that you can apply to a farm or a property or a business. And it fits really well for cannabis farms and for homesteading, really good design process. So I practice this and I teach this, and I do a lot of consulting for cannabis farmers and use these tools in a lot of my work. So I was fortunate to be getting exposed to all these things early on. And by the time I had the opportunity at 20 years old, I was able to get my own property, my first 40 acres, and feeling confident enough, even as a young guy going into that I had the skills at that point to do what I saw my peers in my community doing. And yeah, started doing that tie down technique, hiding those plants in the veggie garden. You'd get 2 and 3 pound plants. On a big one, you get 5 pound plants. It'd be all top buds. You'd tie that whole thing out. It would cover 10 feet by 10 feet, be 3 foot tall buds when it was finished. And you would put fake flowers on bamboo all in it and hide that thing. And, people wouldn't even see these plants. They'd walk right into your garden and stand right next to them and not even recognize them. So, these were all awesome techniques to learn. And that was early 2000s, right when I was getting started with that. And at that same time, big indoor was happening. The purple craze had hit towards the end of the late 90s. And I was working on a big indoor, 120 light indoor in the woods. This was a guerrilla indoor, generator buried in the ground, and exhaust pipe buried, 60 feet from the shed, and all silencers, and growing these carport tents that would have 24 lights in each one of them, 1,000 waters, down old logging roads. And you would just be able to, skinny logging road, but you could build a platform, build a deck, basically, throw up one of these tents in a day. And I learned a lot working for those guys for a while, and pumping purple when purple hit the scene. That was a game changer around here. Everybody switched to the perp, and if you were growing that purple, you were getting $4,000 to $5,000 a pound for it. Even when we started growing it outdoor in the early 2000s, we were still getting $4,000 a pound for it here in Humboldt in our driveways. So it was pretty amazing. Some of that weed back then was being shipped to Tokyo, we'd heard, where they were getting 12 grand a pound for it. So that wasn't nuts, but that's how crazy the purple market was. I mean, who knows what pounds are going for in Tokyo these days, but back then, some big bucks. So, yeah, man, was always an organic grower, that's certainly a big thing of what permaculture pushes, is using your available resources and closing those loops. And some of the early growers that were teaching me how to make these really easy to make, really nasty anaerobic ferments, which are somewhat similar to what we make today. What we make today is a lot cleaner and healthier, but I mean, this was 20 plus years ago. These OGs would have you just fill up a barrel with blood meal and fill it up with water and let that just sit for 2 or 3 weeks, just get all anaerobic and nasty. And you dilute that, use a gallon of that or a half gallon of that into 50 or 100 gallons. That would be your veg. You do another barrel of that of bone meal, and that would be your flouring. And super gross, but super effective. That was the super cheap old school dope grower technique. My buddy Pete, one of my first mentors, taught me that. So what I've learned over the last 6-7 years has been Korean natural farming, which then led me to an evolution of that, which is called Jadam. Jadam, ultra low cost farming, which was founded by the son of the guy who brought us Korean natural farming, who wanted to develop a way to bring natural farming to an even larger scale, where big ag could adopt these practices. And Jadam fits really well for our context in the cannabis industry, and especially out here in the Emerald Triangle where I work, and where people have land and have different plants. And out here we have access to the ocean. So it's all about, recognizing these resources all around us, and we can make our own fertilizers and our own pesticides, and we can build these systems that mimic, what we see in nature, and they're these really resilient systems, these really strong systems. And right now, the bottom line is, out here, at least in Northern California, the cannabis market is crashing right now. Had a real nice peak early this spring. There was a little shortage, and now there's a major flood, and prices are really low. And something I tell farmers is, you've got two ways you can make more money, increase your profits, and one is to expand, which is going to take more money and more land and more people and more licensing and more bullshit, and the other is to reduce your expenses, cut those costs. And that's a big thing that natural farming can do. When we learn to make our own nutrients, we learn to make our own pesticides, and we learn to bring in plants that are going to attract natural predators that are going to take care of your pests. And when you build a system with a lot of diversity in it, and it's going to have natural predators move in there. So I'll tell you about a little consult I did the other day. This was a couple of days ago. I went out to a farm, and I run these workshops here, boot camps, we call them regen camps and regen boot camps, where we teach a lot of these natural farming practices. And this was a guy who had come to my class and wanted to have me up to his farm. So I went out there, and he's got 30,000 square feet of mixed light and outdoor, a little of both. And, that's kind of your typical Humboldt licensed cannabis grow these days. Your outdoor grow is usually about a half acre to an acre right now. And his, I said, what was your fertilizer bill this year? He said, oh, well, I grow all organic, but it's all bottles. We spent $100,000. And I said, well, what's your pesticide bill? It's half of that. Half of that was $50,000 on pesticide and wetting agent. And, so that's a lot of your profit right there. That's a big chunk of your profit right there. So if we can whittle away at those numbers, if we can make some things that are going to replace those things in your lineup, those fertilizers. And so in natural farming, we look at the plant as having 3 phases of life: vegetative phase, transition phase, when it's switching from veg into flower, and flowering stage. And so we make fertilizer from these plants that are growing at those phases of their life. And so in the springtime, I go out to these farms and we look at what's growing in the springtime. The grass is growing. We finally got a bunch of rain here. It doesn't rain here for 6-8 months in the summer. Grass all dies. But in the winter, tons of rain. In a good year, we get a lot of rain. Grass starts growing by April, May, June, or March, April, May. We start seeing some tall grass. You can cut it down with a lawnmower with the bag on it, and bag that up and make fertilizer. Make your own liquid fertilizer. We have the blackberry bushes around here. Everybody considers them invasive, which is great. It means they're on every single property I go out to. I know there's going to be blackberry there. We just have to look around for some disturbed soil, basically. And so the blackberry is a great plant because in the springtime, it's vegging. It's vegging very early. It's a hardy, drought-resistant plant. You can't kill that fucking thing. People hate these blackberries. But it serves many purposes. It stacks many functions. So in the springtime, it's got the green, leafy, fast-growing shoots, high in nitrogen, high in growth hormones. We make our liquid fertilizers, veg fertilizer those. And then it starts fruiting a little later in the summer, June and July, into August even. And so when we have the unripe berries, when they're red, when those blackberries are red, they're not quite ripe yet, we make our fertilizer, our transition fertilizer out of those unripe berries. And then when we have the ripe berries, we make our flowering and fruiting ferment out of those. So we're making our fertilizers seasonally throughout the year as these inputs are arriving. We also make them out of the cannabis, because everything that cannabis plant needs to grow is in that cannabis plant. All the nutrients it wants are in there. So in the springtime, I'm killing males, I'm thinning plants, I'm cutting out bottoms. You can use you're cleaning up the legs of a plant, use all those little tiny leaves. those fast growing little shoots. I see you got this beautiful tent behind you. You could be practicing all this stuff. Shave those legs and use those inners. When they start going in the flower and you got those little tiny buds at the bottom, clean those out, make your transition tea out of that. And then I like to grow some auto flowers on my farm. So I know I'm going to have some flower early in the year. I don't do any depth here. I didn't do any depth the last 2 years. And so I know I'm going to have some bud early in the year that I can add to my flowering ferment that I can use on my full terms. And these will be ready in 2 weeks. They take about 10 days to 2 weeks. So these are really easy ferments to make. They're really accessible. It really gets you looking at your property and all these plants differently. So then you got a whole range of plants that we make pesticides out of. And these are trees, and these are herbs, things that have a lot of aromas, high in essential oils. So when we walked around this guy's farm the other day, he's got bay laurel tree, the pepperwood, which is every farm, every property out here in Humboldt, it has it for the most part. Really easy for me to find. Wherever you have riparian areas, they grow along the streams, and anywhere there's a waterway or a ditch, you're going to find these pepperwoods. Excellent pesticide. The way you identify these plants, like I said, they have a lot of aroma. But also look at these plants. What plants do you never see a pest on? If you look at this bay laurel tree, you've never seen a pest on it. The fig tree is one that you never see a pest on the fig tree. Fig trees are even deer resistant, really drought resistant. They grow great out here in our Mediterranean climate. So this guy had a bunch of fruit trees. So we're looking at his fruit trees. He had a fig. We looked at some ferns on the drive out to his place. We drove through a field of these bracken ferns, and these bracken ferns are high in phosphorus. So we make a flowering ferment for them, from them, and we'll also make a pesticide, make a super powerful pesticide out of them. So like I said, we're trying to stack functions, and every plant we want to have multiple uses. We have the mistletoe out here. Mistletoe is this invasive species that grows on our oak trees, grows on a lot of the trees. And he had nice mixed oak woodland out there with some oak trees, and we found some mistletoe. And the mistletoe is high in phosphorus, great for flowering. So you got all these amazing plants right there on his property. He's looking around his property thinking, I got nothing here. He's thinking maybe we could cut the grass when the grass grows. And we walked around, and within 100 feet of his grow, there was all these amazing plants that he could use. He's got horsetail on his property, which is high in silica. We make a fungicide out of that also. So yeah, I'm gonna be going out there somewhat regularly, through the next year, and helping him make inputs. His neighbors came over also, and got the rundown. So I think I'll be going to a couple farms out in his little neighborhood there, and we'll be making inputs. We'll be making them seasonally as these plants come up. In March, the miner's lettuce comes up, and like I said, in June, the horsetail really comes up. So you go out every month, and there's something to make. We can make our own calcium out of eggshells. We can go out here to the ocean. The ocean's 2 hours drive from my house, and about a half hour from where these guys' farm is. And we can go to the fish cleaning station and gather up the fish guts and make fish amino acid and make fish liquid fertilizers. And we can gather up the seaweed there and the kelp and make our own, kelp liquid fertilizers. And we've got the oyster shells there. We go at low tide, we gather up the oyster shells, we crush those up and make our calcium extracts out of those. So all these are free. I don't spend any money on my grow. We make our own compost, and I grow in hugels with all materials gathered here on the land. And that's the big challenge for me, is I'm trying to teach people, how do you grow like you washed up on an island, on a deserted island. Your seeds are in your pocket, they're safe, but you got, how are you going to farm, man? And So I would encourage everybody to pick up the Jadam book, Jadam, Jadam, Ultra Low Cost Agriculture, and you can learn these things really easily yourself. Jadam, there's a great YouTube page with a lot of excellent lectures. And I've got some great videos on my YouTube showing how to make some of these liquid fertilizers and how to make some of these inputs. And yeah, it's fun, man, because it's been so devastating out here the last few years. Legalization has been so hard on these growers, and it used to be, you know, fun. This was their dream to have these farms, and now it's just taken all the wind out of their sails, and it's a nightmare. And they're losing their, you know, they're losing all this money they work for, and it's getting harder and harder to grow. They're having to buy clones from these nurseries. The nurseries are sending them buggy clones. It's just getting harder and harder to be a cannabis farmer, and it's taking a lot of the wind out of the sails. And then you start teaching them things like natural farming, and showing them that, hey, you've got all this profit wrapped up in your business that you might be able to get out of there, and you can do it with exploring all these plants that you already have here. You don't have to go to the grocery store and buy any of this shit. You already have it here. That blows their fucking minds and gets them really excited and gives them a little hope. Like, yeah, there is a little light at the end of this tunnel, because there is. Because the way we've been growing, the way the grow store has been teaching us to grow for the last 20 years is expensive. It was no problem when pounds were $2,000-$3,000. It was no fucking problem. Throw money at the problems. No problem. We'll just grow more. Well, now you can't just grow more. You know, the price is so low now that if you're not processing it and growing it correctly, you're going to lose money on every pound you grow right now. That's how fucked up it is out here. I'm hearing a depth pounds in the rec market are going for $400, you know? So that's ugly. There's not much profit left at that point.
No, and it doesn't take the fun out of it, but it's disheartening. You know, when you were getting a certain price for something back in the good old days, it's nice that you can pull back in methods like this well, back then it would have been to maximize your profits. Nowadays, it's just to stay alive and keep living the dream. You know, there's quite the difference there. You know what I mean? It sucks that, well, it's amazing that there is that option, but it sucks that you have to take such a beating, you know, on your work just because you should be able to get the same price as you were. You know what I'm saying? You know, it stinks it's came to that.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, you know, people know the Humboldt name, and they certainly know this region, but there's been a lot of terrible weed pumped out of here as the big green rush happened over the last couple of decades, and just production went up. And unfortunately, there are amazing growers, still the best growers in the world. I will weigh in, that are here in Northern California and Southern Oregon and this area of the world. For outdoor growers, there's nobody that has more experience growing really high grade. And yeah, it's and unfortunately, we just don't have consumers yet that can differentiate a really quality product like that. We just don't have enough education yet. You look at the wine industry, and people that are really into wine, people are just real wine aficionados who spend the big bucks on wine. They know about wine. They know about the region that it comes from. They know about the vineyard. They might even know a little bit about cultivation techniques or winemaking techniques. You know, like, we have these amazing, you know, what we call regenerative cannabis farmers here. These are these ones using these closed loop techniques that are creating the most unique product to their farm, a product that cannot be replicated anywhere because it's being grown with all these closed loops, you know, fertilizers made from their property, and all these things. And until we get really sophisticated consumers that are going to start understanding that there's more to weed than just a flashy logo on a Mylar bag. You know what I mean? There is so much more to it, especially a product that, when grown in the poor environment or in the poor hands or poor techniques, can be toxic as fuck. sprayed with just all kinds of banned and toxic chemicals and grown with all kinds of nasty shit and have all kinds of negative environmental impact. And you know, you don't want to be smoking a blood diamond there. And I know we don't all have the, you know, having good weed is a fucking privilege for sure, and access to good weed is a privilege. But you know, we just don't have a sophisticated market yet, and we don't have these farmers don't have access to enough markets. You know, there's way overproduction here. They've licensed too many farms in California. Until they can open up these interstate markets and international markets and get these farmers' products on the shelf in Tokyo, yeah, it's going to be a tough few years of people just trying to hold on and not just lose the farm, you know. And I'm telling people, yeah, try to scale back. You know, this guy rents a farm. I said, try to give that farm back for a year or two, you know, and just tighten the belt. And yeah, you know, if you're losing money on every pound, why would you try to grow more? You know, you got to try to cut those costs. So farmers are getting it. Thankfully, there are a lot of teachers and there is a lot of good education out there around natural farming, and people are starting to get hip, starting to get wise. The Emerald Cup has done a great job promoting regenerative farming with their Regenerative Farm Award over the last bunch of years, and really shining the light on a bunch of killer farmers and killer practices. And yeah, man, so it's still exciting. Cannabis is still very exciting because I'm learning new stuff all the time, and this little regenerative community is really on a bunch of cutting edge shit. And you know, we don't just get laughed out of the building anymore for talking about fermenting zucchinis, you know.
No, not at all. I mean, I remember back not so long ago, let's see here, about what, 2015 around there, when just the organic thing was taken off, and then it went from the organic to the no-till, and now it isn't even a question anymore. I mean, the argument, I think, was long won. You know what I mean? It's definitely has opened up a lot of eyes. And you know, the thing I've appreciated about my organic journey is the spirituality that kind of come with it as well. You know, as you dig deeper into the soil, you kind of dig deeper into yourself, and it's kind of a check all bases as you go deeper into the organics. You know, you want to do better about what you're doing around you, the environment, but along the way, you're improving yourself. It's really cool how organics can really feed the soul and soil, you know, together. It's fascinating. It's been a fascinating journey for me, and I haven't had, you know, the experience that you've had. Do you wish now, looking back, as you know, the guerrilla days, that you wish everybody could have been doing it back then, instead of trying to bring all the nutrients into the forest to feed all them, you know, guerrilla grows and shit?
Well, you know, bro, when I was starting was mid '90s, so these guys were already 20 years into growing here by the time I was getting into it. And I've talked to some of those guys who were the real OGs. You know, the kids that I grew up with, their parents, and this one was telling me that, you know, they were doing those techniques. There was no grow store back then. This was the mid '70s. You could get Stutzman's chicken shit. That was it. That was all you could get at the hardware store in town. Or maybe not even, maybe it was steer manure, but I thought it was chicken shit. So the homie would tell me that he would hike a bag of this chicken shit out into the forest with a tarp, and they would go out under the madrone trees, and they would scrape up the madrone duff underneath the madrone trees. And this is what we do in natural farming. We collect this leaf mold, we call it, which are the broken down, decomposed leaves underneath that first top layer leaf. That's full of your indigenous microorganisms. It's full of all your good microbes. They would gather that up and throw it in this tarp with that bag of chicken shit and mix it all up and come back 3 weeks later, and it would have composted and broken down, and it had been colonized by those IMOs. And they would mix handfuls of that into their holes. And this was in the '70s. So they were doing natural farming, bro. They were using what they had and using a little bit of nitrogen in that chicken manure. And, you know, they didn't have any, they were broke back to the land or hippies, you know, they had no money. This was before weed was even worth much, you know. This was before they had the indica strains. They only had sativas from Mexico and Colombia and stuff. These were surfer dudes from San Diego that had moved up here. And they got to grow some of those first indica seeds. You know, they were telling me about that. When the Mazar first got brought back from Afghanistan, they were some of the first dudes that got to grow it in this neighborhood. But yeah, man, they were kind of doing that. And then, you know, by the time I was getting into growing, you had your indoor guys using general hydroponics, which was what I got taught on, the 3-part GHP. And you had outdoor, if you wanted to grow organically, there was a product called Earth Juice that was this stinky bottle of like anaerobic, super nasty stinky tea. But that's all we would buy as far as organic bottled stuff back then. There really wasn't much available. There really wasn't much bagged soil available. There just wasn't much going on. There was black gold. I mean, I remember like when Fox Farm came along, you know what I mean? And they made some bottles, but there really wasn't much around. So it's just, back then it wasn't like the scene you see now. It was nothing like what we see now. Seemed like probably in the 2000s and is when all that really blew up, and the heavy bottles, and people got hooked on the bottle, man. Cute labels, I get it. We like cute labels. We like cute logos, you know. And like I said, when the price was high, shit, it was easy to go to the grocery store and buy a bottle that was going to fix all your problems. But yeah, man, it's just cool to see all these people practicing this stuff at home, and people that have the grow tent in their garage and are doing, you know, doing this stuff on all kinds of scales. Yeah, it's just what I love about teaching it to people and going to their farms and doing it. It's just so accessible to anybody. It's so easy to learn. There's no big expensive tools or expensive equipment. We're using water and leaf mold out of the forest and plants. Like, there's so little to this, and it doesn't need to be as complicated. You know, our ancestors farmed so simply for eons, you know, mostly using manures, animal manures, and our own manure, you know, human manures. And you know, not going to get on a big human manure rant, but you know, we put our poo in our clean water and flushed it down the toilet. You know, I mean, that's not the best use of anything. But you could use your urine to make a really high nitrogen fertilizer really easily. You know, I mean, there's free resources. You could be part of the loop. You know, you want to close the loop, get in the loop. We've removed ourselves from the loop, you know. And just be careful where you put that bucket. That's all I'll warn you.
So, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, 13 years old, carrying buckets of water up the mountain. That to me sounds like it sounds like a Stand By Me kind of scenario. Hey guys, you want to see a water? You guys want to see a pot plant? Come on. Good. Grab a bucket.
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely was. I mean, it was a trip. It was, oh, here comes my boss. Hey, go hide this gun in the culvert because the sheriff's coming down the road. You know, it was Wild West, man. It was. I'm really grateful that I got to be a part of it. This little snapshot in history. It had a lot of negative parts to it, you know, because there was all this money involved. There was a lot of horrible things that were hidden in these hills. There was a lot of abuse that happened, and that was hidden because too many people had too much to lose. So, you know, that's a bummer that, you know, wherever there's money and power, and people are going to get corrupted and do bad shit. And that stuff still happens out here. You hear these bad stories, but for the most part, man, cannabis gave a lot to this little community. It created this community, and it created a beautiful thing. Those old hippies, the back to the landers, they were broke. they told me that cannabis was the answer to their prayers. They were trying to feed their children and put gas in the car. They moved up here, and the rednecks that were living here were none too happy that these hippie back of the landers were fleeing San Francisco and coming up here. And so people are having a tough life out on the hill. And then cannabis came along, and their friends in the city were willing to buy a little bit of it. And suddenly they could get some shoes for little Timmy, and they could afford to send the kids to school and get them to town, you know, which was an hour drive away. And then they started building little community schools. You know, my first school I went to school at here was kindergarten through 6th grade, little one-room schoolhouse with about, you know, a dozen of us kids, all the little grower kids from the neighborhood. And there was a preschool before that, little cabin on the hill here with a handful of kids. So it came out of it. A lot of nonprofits were built to protect the redwoods here and protect the Eel Rivers and the Eel River and some other rivers here. And a beautiful community center was built here where we still gather and celebrate, have music and parties, and a lot of local volunteer fire departments, you know. So cannabis, we owe so much to cannabis in Humboldt and in southern Humboldt and northern Mendo especially. And yeah, you know, when the market crashed here right after legalization, 2017, the market crashed, pounds went down to $300, $400, $500 like they are now. And you had a lot of people left. People just left. They weren't gonna, you know, they estimated Humboldt had around 15,000 grows. And after that, you know, within a couple of years, they thought it was down to 3,000 or something. I mean, people left. So the people that stayed were the people that wanted to be a part of this community. So now you have, it's mostly the people that grew up here that were here before the Green Rush. And so you've got that core, you've got the OGs, you've got the kids that grew up here. You know, there's a lot of us who grew up here and have just never left. I've never lived anywhere else in my life, you know. So you've still got a lot of love here. You still got the original Humboldt crew is here. They're here because they love it here. They're going to be here till the wheels fall off. I mean, you know, we love the ocean. We love the redwoods. We love being outside. We love the clean air. There's so many beautiful things about this place. Besides, it's a great place to hide the ganja, you know. So, yeah, I've got high hopes for it, but people are gonna have to change their ways, and they're gonna have to be open-minded. And it's given me hope because I've ran these classes and I've had some OGs. I've had some of the old timers, some of my friends' parents come. People that have been growing for 40, 50 years now. People that started in the 70s came and learned some of these tricks and have been making some of these inputs. And that warms my heart, man. So it's good, you know, it feels good. You can sleep soundly at night. And it just makes it a lot funner. And it makes it a really unique product when you can bust out some herb and say, man, I made this. I really made this with soil I built and, you know, inputs I made, and you can really take that thing to a whole nother level as far as a unique product that nobody else can replicate. And you get out of the plant, you combine it with these other plants. And when you use most of those fertilizers, I mean, a lot of the organic ones they're using these same products. They're using these same plants. So it's not a stretch to do what we're doing. And yeah, I'm just stoked to see so many people learning Korean natural farming and learning what Jadam is, and people asking me great questions. And, you know, a few years ago, I was talking about this stuff. People didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And now I actually have some people to talk to about this stuff. So it's great. And yeah, so there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope, and people just gotta get creative. People here have persevered through some pretty tough times and some changes, and I'm amazed at some of these farmers, how creative some of them have gotten, and some of the pivots I've had to see people do, and how creative they've been. And so I know people here are capable of making the changes they need. And yeah, it's been humbling though, man. I mean, we all had little empires up here, and certainly been a humbling time. And
So I can't really help but ask, but with the past like that, I and I find it parallel for a lot of us. It's been in the cannabis world, I guess you could say, for a while. Has legal cannabis made made it a little bit boring for you? Has it taken some of the thrill out of what you do? I mean, that was some of fun doing what we did back then. I mean, like it or not, was the thrill of possibly getting in trouble, making it a safe trip. Uh, you know, so has legal cannabis kind of taken some of the thrill out of it at all?
yeah, all of the thrill out of it. Yeah, I mean, growing up here and in that, you become an adrenaline junkie, and you grow up needing, when you're used to taking those risks, you get off on them, and it's hard to suddenly have to be a bookkeeper and a compliance officer and an HR rep, and all those things suck. Nobody got into growing weed because they like doing paperwork, Um, so I'm not licensed these days. I run a tiny little educational garden here at Heartwood. I'm back here 20 years later on this property that I grew up on, and it's changed hands a couple times. And I came back up here a year and a half ago to try to get some education going here, and it was right when COVID hit, and that's put the brakes on things. And now this place is coming up for sale. So I grow a tiny property here on the a tiny grow here on the property. We're allowed 400 square feet. And I basically grow it for the owners of the property. I smoke a little bit myself, but I'm growing this for the owners here. And I do a lot of R&D, and I use all this garden in my teaching. So we did a bunch of workshops here this summer, but now with this place coming up for sale, everything's kind of on hold, and I don't know what I'm doing next year. But yeah, man, I had 2 farms and was rocking it. And in 2014, I separated from my wife, and started a 7-year divorce. And at that same 6 months later, got busted at one of my farms. And between those 2 things, I pretty much lost everything. And, so I am kind of starting back over from scratch after putting a lot into it all. And, you got to kind of lose it all to find it all, and I don't regret any of the way it's gone down. It's pushed me to get deeper into my consulting work and deeper into permaculture and teaching, and this really fulfilling work, working with these legacy farmers to try to save their farms. So I know I wouldn't be doing that if I still had those farms, or if I still had some of that money. So yeah, it's a trip, man. It's been very humbling for me, and just having to learn to grow up a little bit and find those thrills in healthier ways that we used to seek. And so I'm super grateful that I still get to work with the herb on a small scale, which has been super low pressure and really fun for the last 2 years. And I still get to do a lot of breeding and making hash and all the fun stuff here. So I don't know what's in store for Heartwood for this property, and I'm hoping that a good buyer will come along and have some good vision for it. We have somebody who's put in an offer, but I don't know if it's going to move through. But I like the guy a lot, and he was super on board for keeping a program here and teaching more classes here. So yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing this coming year, but I don't want to go manage a rec grow. I can tell you that. I'm happy to help people. I've got people offer me their farms left and right now. People are really over it, and I'd rather just consult and teach and help people, empower people to, do this stuff themselves. So, yeah, that's yeah.
I can't help but wonder, you brought up a couple of similarities here, and that's the price of cannabis now, and that's the price of cannabis in 17 there, when it did kind of go haywire. At that point, in my opinion, call it fate, call it whatever, but I think that's when the the extracts really kind of started to take off, and it kind of reinvigorated the market there, swiped up a lot of that extra cannabis that was available on the market, turned it into extracts, and kind of corrected the flower market a little bit. uh, which that's one of the only hopes I have for like good cannabis here these days, to be honest with you, is that the extract market will just
Yeah.
kind of squash it and just leave, just a bland few, and then they'll be leave the masses wanting the flavors that they've always had or are yearning for. But do you think that there's something in this price kind of crisis other than like here, blame the home grower, take away as many rights to grow, to get as much cannabis off the streets or off the market is the answer? What do you think's your answer for the to correct it this time around?
Hmm. Where are you located, Eagle?
I'm in Michigan. I'm in Michigan.
Michigan. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how do we correct it, man? Well, I'll tell you, 2017, I still had my licensed farm in Mendocino. That was the last year I grew a licensed crop. And taking it into that 2018 year, trying to sell it was just a nightmare. There, you had big companies on the market that were selling at a loss, so they could dominate the shelf space, so that they could go out and say, "Hey, we're the number one cannabis brand in California," and raise all this money. And so I couldn't move any of my weed. And even at $5 a jarred eighth, I couldn't move this killer regeneratively farmed, Mendo herb. And so, yeah, it was rough, man. A lot of that weed I sold at a loss, and then that, some of that weed, by the time by the time there was anything to do with it, a lot of it got made into distillate. Exactly what you're saying. There was such a glut of herb and such a flood, and prices were so low. The majority of that, a big chunk of that crop got made into distillate. I ended up getting about $100 a pound for it. So a lot of it I took a loss on. And the next year I started, going into that 2018 season, I thought, oh, all this flower I grew last year is going to sell. So I'm starting my crop for 2018. And come June, nothing sold. I've had this fiasco. I'm having to liquidate weed at $100 a pound into distillate. And I pulled my plants. I pulled the plug. I said, I can't continue licensing. I can't grow a crop this year. My distributor was telling me to take the year off, telling me not to grow. So I had some plants. I let them all die. Yeah, it didn't grow in 2018, didn't grow in 2019, and had to sell my farm in 2020. So yeah, it's ugly, man. What happened and when the market fell out is a lot of people left the industry. You had a lot of people just bail out, just like me. And the next year, 2019, if you grew a crop in 2018 and we're selling it in 2019, the market was up, and it was good until this last four or 5 months or so. So it's cyclical. I think this year, that's what I'm telling my clients is, I think you're going to, try to hold on what you can this year. I think if you grow a crop next year, you're going to be able to sell it in 2023 for a decent price. But yeah, it's going to be getting tighter and tighter, and people can't expect those prices anymore like they used to, until we can get into some other interstate markets, until we can get it over state lines. And people up, on the East Coast actually want an Emerald Triangle product, Yeah, it's sad. You see all these legacy farmers going away, and you see the mom and poppers just getting out of it. And these people are some of the best, not just ganja farmers, but you had some of the best edible makers and hash makers and people that had a good little living, making stuff in their house or in their garage or in their back 40. And it's just sad. We used to put on a cannabis farmers market here. I had a store in town called Trim Scene Solutions, where I sold trim machines, extraction equipment. And I'd put on this farmers market called the Casual Crop Exchange in 2016 and 17. And maybe we started in 2015 even. And it was an open air farmers market. I'm sure you guys have these in Michigan, or you probably did before things got too regulated out there. But they were popping, man. We'd have live music and 50 booths, and a lot of these Humboldt farms and Mendo farms, this was their first time coming out and doing a booth. And it was a fucking blast, man. And we used to be that every weekend here we'd have some cannabis event going on, a cannabis cup, or there's just so much culture, and there's just so little culture left, man. So that's the tough thing, especially with COVID. At least when we didn't have COVID, we would all go to shows at our community center. We had Reggae on the River. We had a couple festivals that we do every year. It's been hard, man. COVID's been hard. I mean, we're a pretty isolated people up here. We're pretty used to it anyways, but this is like, fuck. I'm like so isolated up here on this fucking hill. I mean, there's, eight or nine people that live on this property, but we're all pretty reclusive. So yeah, man, I think it's cyclical, and people just got to hold on and diversify. When I go out on these farms, I'm talking to them about what are some other crops you can pull out of your farm, even if it's just food to feed yourself. It's expensive to have to drive into town here to buy a head of lettuce, and we can grow killer food here in the winter time. It's actually easier to grow food here in the winter than in the summer. The summer here is hot and sunny, and it takes a lot of water, and there's pests. In the winter, you can grow in your hoops and your greenhouses. And as long as the wind and the rain and the snow don't crush it or blow it away, you can grow killer food here in the winter. It'll be 60, 70, 80 in your greenhouse all winter here. So we're about to clean up my winter greenhouse and put in a bunch of veggies for the winter. And just talking to people about that and different herbs they could be growing. There's all this demand in the medicinal herb market. There's a major shortage of all medicinal herbs, almost every single one of them. There's not enough being produced for the market. That's something cannabis farmers could easily be producing right alongside their cannabis. A lot of them are already. And these are plants we could also be stacking functions and making into pesticides, making into fertilizers, and making into medicines for ourselves and our families and our community. So yeah, man.
What would be some good rotation crops for somebody like you're saying that wanted to like alternate? What would be some beneficial alternative rotation crops?
Well, there's, just things you can grow all winter. You can grow all kinds of lettuces and kales and chard and cabbages and broccoli and cauliflower, Asian greens. I mean, there's so many things that grow really good all winter that you can grow in those beds while you got no ganja in them. And then a lot of those things you can grow into the spring and into the summer. Shade lovers, grow them under your ganja, grow them on the north side of your ganja. You can grow lettuce right under your ganja plants. They're not going to rob much from your ganja. These are little plants, and these plants all grow better together. These roots all want to communicate. These microbes all want to work together. So yeah, having as much diversity in those beds as possible. I did something fun today. I went around my garden and took a small bucket and went to everything that's in flower, everything that's going to seed right now. And this was all the different herbs and perennials and flowers, and trying to make a big seed mix that I'm actually going to throw out on some beds and see what comes up. And it'll be kind of its own little cover crop and sort itself out. And if stuff comes up that I don't like where it is, I'll chop and drop it, or I'll transplant it somewhere else if it's something I want. And these are all plants that are drought resistant. A lot of them come back every year. They just grow like crazy. I don't have to water them. So I started with the oregano. I've got these huge bushes of oregano. Oregano is amazing, ground cover herb, makes a great pesticide. Goes to seed, makes a ton of seed. And then I had the wormwood, which is a great trap plant for aphids. The aphids will show up on this plant. And so I plant it all around the edges of my garden. And when I'm doing my scouting for pests, I'm not just checking my ganja, I'm checking all my trap plants. And if I get a big outbreak on my trap plants, I'll spray the trap plants instead of the ganja. So I'm not having to spray the ganja as much. So I'm put a bunch of wormwood in there, and then a bunch of fennel seed, and then a bunch of lamb's ear, and then a bunch of calendula and hollyhock. And these are all things that just grow on their own, that'll grow in just the worst compacted, dirt, mullein seeds. These are all, killer plants. Mulleins, a dynamic accumulator plant, has a super deep taproot, brings up these really hard to reach nutrients from deep in the soil. So I use it to make fertilizer. So it's a great herbal ally because you can make a lot of good things with it for your lungs. So yeah, I went out there and just collected all this seed, and had it's a small bucket, it's a 1 gallon bucket, but I got it almost all the way full of all these different seeds, 10 or 12 seeds. I've got this big tree tobacco in my other garden that I'm going to put some of that in, because that's got a lot of seed, and that thing's a really cool tobacco plant that got almost 15 feet tall, and in one season. Yeah, so things that'll grow on their own, things that'll produce a ton of biomass, things that'll pull hard to reach nutrients up out of the soil, things I can chop and drop, and create a lot of fertility in those beds, and things that are going to grow on their own, things that I don't have to baby, you know what I mean? So that's what I'm looking at, how to do this thing easier with the plants that are smart enough to know how to do this on their own. So yeah, man, this is, I'm just doing R&D and trying to learn and play with new techniques and try to figure it all out with the tools we've got available here and the plants we have available. And it's fun. We got a great community that's into all this stuff. So I'm a part of the Dragonfly Earth Medicine Collective. Awesome group of farmers and medicine makers. I know you've had some of our members on here. You did an awesome episode with Conscious Rhythms out of Hawaii. And oh man, what a rad episode. And that dude was laying it down. So he's part of the DEM family. And this is a group of regenerative farmers, natural farmers, and people that really hold themselves to a really high standard and a really high ethic, and education is part of it. People who are also sharing this knowledge. And so yeah, it's been really fun to be a part of that community and get to promote all those amazing farms and learn from all those incredible farmers. And everybody does it differently. We're all trying to get to this destination that is killer food, or nutrient dense food, or killer ganja, or whatever it is. And there's many paths to get there. And it's fun to see all the different ways we all get there,
Yeah, we have had a few of you guys on, and more of you coming. Yeah, because it is catching on. You guys are far from falling on deaf ears these days. People are hungry to hear that information. They want to know how to self-sustain. That's one of the things always said that I really believe is one of the key ingredients as a medicine in cannabis anyway, is the growing aspect of it. As the part of, you may have used it for medicine at one point, it has its value, but once you start cultivating it actually takes a whole different turn. And I think that is, sustainability, that whole fact that you're creating your own medicine, that I can, you know what I mean, sustain myself and sustain my own healing power, is very empowering all in itself. And then once you say, you take it to the next level where you're now feeding and making yourself way more sustainable, I can only imagine the empowering feeling that it would that you would have at that point. You know what I mean? So it's not, everybody is very eager to listen these days. Every time I have one of you guys on the show, everybody's anxious to hear, your story, how you're doing it, where you're going to be spreading your knowledge next. So yeah, thank you and keep it up. That's for sure. Because you guys are, you guys still have you guys' work cut out for you. You know that. You know that. But you guys have definitely opened a lot of doors, a lot of
Yeah.
ears.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, bro. There's a lot of good people doing the good work in the industry, and it's awesome to see such a shift. And yeah, I think it's what we need. And we all find ganja from a different place. That's the thing. Ganja is our unifier, but we're all so different that come to it. And that's such an interesting thing. And so I think if we can introduce people to healthier food and thinking about your gut and your body the same way as you think about your soil, and you thinking about yourself as a plant, and you thinking about yourself needing the proper nutrition at the proper time of your life, and yeah, it's cool. We can really open some minds, get people thinking about, your consciousness as a plant, and the different growths of your consciousness. And we all want to grow into this beautiful, beautiful bud. And sometimes we get stunted, and sometimes we face really rough growing conditions, that could really fuck us up. Sometimes we get burned. And so we got to feed ourselves really good. We got to feed the microbes in our gut really good. We got to watch the salts and the sugars that we're putting in our soil, and make sure we're not putting too much of that in our bodies either. We're made out of these same microbes. And so just, yeah, once you start thinking like that, realizing, that we're not all that different, any of us, anything, anything alive. And it's cool. It's exciting to just learn more about it and learn more about the mystery of life and tap into it. And yeah, not to get too out there woo woo, but absolutely everybody should get more out there woo woo.
So,
All right,
I
I'm
mean, not
switching
of
to dabs.
all of
Switching to
us.
dabs, bro.
Nice. So not of all of us are blessed to be in such a nice growing locale to where everything's green and beautiful, all year round. So how do I would how, let's say I get into it. How do I sustain during the winter months? Does what I make, in the spring and fall shelf throughout the winter? Or are
Yeah,
there different inputs I should look for during the winter months?
well, with Jadam, these inputs get better with age. That's one of the things I like about them. And we make them in containers, and 5-gallon, 50-gallon, 500-gallon containers. you're filling it up with, for liquid, to make liquid fertilizer, you're filling it up with plant material, some leaf mold, these are the microbes out of the forest, and water. And so you're letting that ferment, and then you're diluting that into your dilution tanks to feed. And as that goes down, when it gets empty, you just fill it back up. More plant material, more leaf mold, more water. You never have to clean it out or empty it out. Every year that this ages, you'd cut the dilution rate in half. It gets more potent with age. It's better with age. So I've got ferments here that I made last year on we used this year, and we used them at all half dilution. And yeah, so it's cool, man. So you can make them really easily, 5-gallon batch. I mean, you dilute these start out at 100 to 1, and you get as hot as 20 to 1. So 5 gallons is going to make a lot. 50 gallons is going to make a lot. So yeah, it's easy to make on a small scale, and while it's not ideal to use the produce you get at the grocery store, because a lot of it's been irradiated, or it's been washed with bleach, or the microbial life has been killed on it, you can use all those food scraps. Anything you throw in your compost, anything anything the little kiddos are always leaving the fruit laying around, you can use that fruit, that ripe fruit. So don't be afraid to just use the use the leftovers from the grocery store if you have to. Like I said, I want to teach you how to do this, that if you wash up on an island, you can do this. Or if you're in a third world country and have no resources, this isn't about growing ganja. This is about being able to grow food where you have zero resources. That's what the Master Cho, who created Korean natural farming, that was his ultimate goal, was to give the power back to the farmer. How do you give the power back to the farmer who's been told by the chemical company, you're not smart enough to be a farmer, and you need to buy our seed, and you need to buy our fertilizers, and how do you give the power back to the farmer? And natural farming does that. So yeah, where was I going with that one? Yeah, you can make them in big batches. They can just sit around. You can do it as simply as just making a veg tea that has all your veg materials. It has some of the vegging cannabis, has some of the vegging blackberry, has some vegging nettle, has some of your grass from the lawn. You can make a tea with all your veg materials together. If you're going to be just feeding it for veg to your cannabis, just make a veg one. At my girlfriend's farm, she just does two barrels for the most part. One all veg, one all flower, and when she's in transition, she does a little mix of the both. So you can really dumb this stuff down for people. I like to ferment all my stuff separately so I can really feed stuff and really tailor my recipes and give things differently week to week. But that's already making it trickier than it needs to be. So it's got to be easy, or the farmer's not going to do it. They're not going to adopt these practices. They're just going to go to the store. So yeah, some things you could be growing right there in your pots, some little herbs you could be growing. I would just look at some cover crops that you could grow in your understory there. Maybe a winter rye. Ryegrass grows nice and low. Maybe even alfalfa. And when these get up, these will be nitrogen fixing while they're growing in your soil. And when they start getting tall, you cut them down and you could just mulch it, or you could use that to make your liquid fertilizer. So, or you could do like I did and go out in the garden and start figuring out what are some of these, plants that grow really easily there. And you could even, undersow them there, or just throw another pot in the corner there and get a few of these growing. You could grow some mint, grows really easily in a window in the winter, to make some pesticide out of. Garlic, whole cloves of garlic. If you're in a third world country, you could make the pesticide out of cigarette butts if you had to. That's all you had access to. A little bit of tobacco you can make the pesticide out of, So yeah, figuring out the ways to do this. And what do you guys like to eat? You like to eat, you guys like pesto? You want to grow some basil in there in the winter? What are you jonesing for in the winter? That would be nice to have pumping out of the tent there. Weed's getting so cheap here, people might want to start putting some kale in the greenhouse for the winter.
I've went through my phases. I've talked about many a times, man. It's not even the fact of, all the pulses that you're talking about there. They're the dead space that I see there. I mean, even as these lights beam out here, there's 2 to 4 feet right here outside of these tents that, like you're saying, some type of vegetable, some kind of plant could be utilizing. It's wasted light, it's wasted energy, flat out. At points I have tried to throw some mints in my pots just because I know that they do kind of keep insects away. They are a little bit of a pest deterrent. And that was amazing. It's funny is I've tried like other plants like mint. I've cloned, and it's amazing how easily mint clones. Just to throw one plant into another plant,
Yeah.
just to get multiple plot. It spreads fast, but just to get it going in other pots, I've actually cloned a few tap mints a few times. It blew my mind how easily it cloned. But as far as cover crops goes, I tried one this last time, and I'm just getting back into soil, and not just getting back into it, but taking it seriously. Before last, every other experience with dirt, it was use it, throw it out, same MO. I went cocoa for a long, long period of time. Mainly weight reasons was the biggest reason for the switch at first, because I was growing in an overhead space. And as the pot stacked up, I started to see the sag. So I was like, I got to start using some lighter material here to
Yeah.
start alleviating some of the weight, which kind of took me to cocoa for a while. And then this year, dealing with Mr. Smiley's Gardens there, he kind of, he flat out, he brought me Smurf boxes. Here you go, kind of opened the door to organics again. But now this time around, I'm back into soil again, but not just back into soil and liking it. I'm more open to the chance now of reusing my soil. And like I said, taking it serious nowadays. It isn't like I said, buy the bags every time and not really give a shit what's going on in the engine there, basically, of the soil. But now it's wanting to understand exactly what's going on, how it works, the parts of the engine, you know what I mean? How it all goes together. Now it's more serious. And again, all much due to Mr. Smiley kind of opened that door up for me. But it's just not me, it's everybody now. Everybody's hungry for that organic knowledge. And moreover, the KNF and Jadam methods that you guys are now teaching as well. So, in your opinion, not just in cannabis, but in farming methods in general, where did it get out of control? I mean, obviously there had to be some old world knowledge of how things should be done. So when did it get out of fucking control and get us into the mess that we're in now?
We should have stuck with hunting and gathering. We never should have gone with this annual agriculture. That was the problem when we settled down and decided that we were going to farm land, and suddenly our diet was really narrowed because we were eating way less items. When we were hunting and foraging, we had a super diverse diet. So that was where we really went wrong. that might be a little farther back than you were asking about. But you know, after the First World War, there were all these nitrogen stores left over from making the bombs, and these companies that made the bombs all became fertilizer companies. They figured out that you could put this stuff on a field and get a crop to grow. And so that's where it really went wrong, is that's where big ag came from, was big military. These guys who built the bombs built big ag. And they, you know, these guys became Dow, and was one of them. So that was definitely a big problem right there. But you know, these guys are trying to convince us that we need big ag to feed the world, and that we'll all starve if we don't farm with big equipment and genetically modified seeds and pesticides and all these fertilizers. But really, only about a third of agriculture that's taking place on the planet right now is being done like that. 2/3 of our ag is actually being done by people, you know, hand implement tools, human scale. It's not being done with tractors. It's being done by families and people that are just picking up hand tools, going out there and doing it every day. That's so we don't need to go that route, and it's not too late. But yeah, it's learning about understanding our soil, learning about that there's a whole environment underneath the soil that's just as important as this one we're living in up above it. And you know, that all the relationships under there, all these networks of microbes and bacteria and fungi and arthropods, and that they're all important. And you know, we need them. We need a healthy amount of them under there to have a healthy world. So yeah, what I think needs to happen, we need to plant more trees. You know, the biggest fixer of nitrogen are trees, and we need to work more trees into our agriculture. I'd love to see more people in our cannabis community get turned on to agroforestry and get turned on to syntropic agriculture. And this is really working these perennial crops into our annual systems, working these trees and annuals all together in the same system. Syntropic agriculture is a really cool type of farming coming out of Brazil, originally pioneered by a man named Ernest Goetsch, who's just incredible. Everybody should go on YouTube and watch Life in Syntropy, it's called. And so he's proven this incredible system of growing these lines of trees that have many layers of crops growing in them, you know, have vines growing up them, have herbs underneath them, have small bushes, and then, you know, 20 feet over is another row of trees, and in between them are annuals growing. And we should be doing this with cannabis. And these systems that they develop, the whole system supports itself. It generates all its own fertility with cover crops. You know, they don't have to bring in anything. They're growing a lot of trees, knowing they're going to chop and drop them and chip them. The trees generate a lot of the fertility. You're growing a lot of trees that are going to generate wood chips, and you know, when you cut them really young, you can create this what's called ramial wood chip, and it's a really fertile wood chip. It's super low carbon to nitrogen ratio wood chip, so it breaks down really quickly and can create soil really quickly. So these are cool systems. Everybody needs to get on syntropic farming, syntropic forestry, and agroforestry, and get into growing more perennials and more trees. Growing annuals sucks. You have to plant them every year. I want to grow more perennials that I don't have to plant, you know. So yeah, we got to work more perennial crops into all of our agriculture. Forests and jungles can be very productive. When you see these, you know, monocrop fields, there's no trees in them. Well, you know, plants aren't meant to grow like that. You need these trees in these systems. You need all these other plants in these systems. So it's been really fun to learn about. It's been hard to learn about because a lot of the information is in Portuguese because it's coming out of Brazil. but they're starting to practice it in Mediterranean climates like ours. And yeah, I'm starting to learn. I've got a guy in Australia that I work with, and I'm following along with what he's doing. And he's developing a syntropic farm in Australia, a commercial farm. And I'm really seeing that we could be doing these same things here with our cannabis, and working multiple crops onto our lands. Where instead of having a monocrop of fruit trees, now you might have, many different fruit trees and many different crops in there, and you might not get the same amount of yield, but over those 5 different crops that are going to yield at different times and different lifespans, you're gonna make way more money and have a way more resilient system, because it's super diverse. If one market crashes, you've got 4 or 5 others. So this is really beneficial to take into these countries where a lot of people are monocrop farming, and they're converting a lot of the palm farms and putting other crops into the palm plantations, which is really good, because that's been a really destructive industry. So yeah, man, there is hope, and there is technology, and all it is really mimicking what we see in nature, and really bringing the forest back into all of this. And Mother Nature's got this divine intelligence we can't even begin to understand. And if we can tap into that and just kind of get out of her way, we can build these systems that just need a little maintenance. Now we are just maintaining the Garden of Eden. We do just have to caretake a little bit and have these super productive systems. And so that's got me excited. I really want to, be planting more trees this coming year, planting trees from seed, knowing the majority of them I'm just going to thin out and return back to the soil. Planting as many of these seeds as possible. That's why I was making that big seed mix today. I want to plant all those seeds out, thin those out. Which ones are going to make a good soil cover, or good ground cover, Yeah, man, talking to the plants. Spend a lot of time talking to the plants. Not a lot of people out here, so you can talk to your dog. You can talk to the fire, the wood stove, and talk to your plants. So talk to a lot of plants and a lot of mushrooms too.
Either way. So do you think it sounds like much in the way they implemented their problem through probably propaganda and misinformation, but you guys are going at it with true information and true knowledge to try to reverse things. But like anything else, it can't just start with us. We've got to kind of pull the younger generation in it now too. Do you think there's a possibility that, now that the eyes are opening, there'll be more and more education, school type classes that are teaching the younger generation kids? The 4-H and programs like that are dying out. So how do we get the fire back into the schools, back into the next generation that really needs to know this? That, you know what I mean? We're understanding it now,
Yeah.
but we got to start the fire with that, I would think. How do we pique their interest?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we are starting to see it being a little more accepted here and there. I know up here at Humboldt State University, up in Arcata, they're starting some cannabis programs. They can't do any hands-on because they get, federal money. So that's a lot of the limits. There's a lot of these institutions are still really limited with what they can teach and what they can get away with. So it's tricky. It's just getting tricky. But yeah, they should be teaching it in the schools. We should be teaching this natural farming in the high school here. This is a farming community. These kids are 3rd generation now, some of them, kids my kids' age are that are in the high school. And they should be learning this stuff so that when they come out of high school and they go to work on dad's farm or big brother's farm, they have some skills, and they can actually teach big brother or dad how to do this natural farming and how to possibly, save the farm or save some bucks or help pay for their salary at least. I just had some people reach out to me recently. I'm hoping we're going to talk some more, but they work with the Mendocino County Jail here. Um, and they have a farming program there where they work with the prisoners and teach them farming. And I'm hoping I get to go teach those guys some natural farming so they can come right out of jail, go get a job on a farm, teaching farmers how to make fertilizers and pesticides. And I had to go into that jail. This was after I got busted and had my case and everything. I got probation and paid a big fine and got community service hours. I had to go down there and get fingerprinted and mugshot, and went into the jail, and I saw they had a beautiful garden there. I was like, holy shit. They got, it was in the back inside the fence. I was like, wow, these guys have a nice garden here. So turns out they have a pretty cool gardening program at the Mendo County Jail. So yeah, we could be rehabilitating a lot of people. I mean, certainly working in the soil and keeping my hands in the soil has really helped me with my sanity and my mental health, and keep me help me through darker times in my life, where I really needed something, and work with this plant has definitely helped me through some tough shit. And just super grateful to get to keep working with it and get to share it with people and turn people onto it still. So to get to share that with some youth would be really special. I was so lucky to get to be exposed to it at the age that I was by the people that I was being exposed to it by. Yeah, I'd love to be able to pass that on to some youths, some youngsters. So let's hope we can get it more normalized, and it's getting there slowly but surely. You go out on people's farms and all their kids are still out there harvesting weed and trimming all the weeds. So that's all still normal. But everybody needs to learn this stuff right now, from kid up to mom up to grandpa. So luckily it's easy to learn, super easy to learn, and really, like I said, accessible to everybody. We all have these plants. Even if all you're growing is cannabis plant, you've got 90% of what you need right there. So makes it fun. It's a little bit of a treasure hunt. Figure out, what's growing in your yard. What do you got around there in Michigan? You got lots of stuff growing there. You got beautiful thick forests there.
I'm in the forest, to be honest with you. Huron National Forest. I'm surrounded mainly by pines and oaks. That's what I have mainly around.
Oh, nice. Do you have the mistletoe out there on your oak trees?
If I'm embarrassed to admit this, but if I did, I wouldn't. At this point, I wouldn't recognize it right off the bat. You know what I'm saying?
You'll
I
have
wouldn't.
to look it
I wouldn't
up,
be able to
Google it, because it just looks like a big round green clump up in the tree, and it's got these little petals, these hard petals that kind of come out like that. But it'll look like a big round green globe up in the tree, and they're bad for the tree. They're invasive, so it's good for you to cut them out of there. And then that one's high phosphorus. You can make a good flour and ferment out of that. Yeah, that's an easy one. If you're in an oak woodland, you definitely got you've got mistletoe somewhere, I bet.
Sure.
Yeah, but a lot of the plants that like people landscape with, you could use. Like we get the oleander. You see this in landscaping all over the place. People have it in front of the dentist's office or in the the center divider of the highway, and it's toxic to animals and humans, but it makes beautiful big red and white flowers, and makes a killer pesticide, great pesticide. So you start scoping this stuff out around town, like, ooh, there's that over there, and there's this over here. You got to be careful that things are sprayed with pesticide. You don't want to bring anything onto your property that's been sprayed with some gnarly pesticide. that's something you really got to take into account if you're bringing on grass clippings from somebody else's lawn, or if you're picking up leaves from somebody else's property. You know, it's nice to get these scores, a big pile of wood chips, a free pile of wood chips. A lot of these trees are often sprayed with a lot of pesticides, especially if they're near power lines, power poles. Out here, they spray a lot of, you know, pesticide around these poles, and then these are the trees that they're trimming and limbing. So you got to be careful about that stuff. Kind of bringing that stuff onto your property and working that in your soil, or so yeah, just being mindful of that kind of stuff. You know, you're asking. We were talking a little. Sorry, you're talking. We were talking a little bit earlier about cover crops, and we're talking about some of the things you could be growing outside your little tent there. You know, you could put in another little bed or some more pots, you know, some more smart pots or something. And, you know, the radishes, the tillage radish, they call it, or the daikon radish, these great little radishes. They really grow really easily in all kinds of weather. They can make in healthy conditions, they can make a good sized radish that grows in the soil, and they break up compacted soil. And there'll be a big leafy green top. You can eat the young tops off them. They're really yummy. You can pull up the radish and eat the radish too. But we chop and we'll let them grow up big, and then we'll chop and drop the tops of them and mulch those, or you could use those as a fertilizer. But then we leave that radish in the ground, and those decompose and, you know, really aerate the soil. You have all these nutrients breaking down in the soil, a lot of nitrogen. So that's something you could work into your system really easily. Or some tillage radish, some beets, some smaller tubers like that. Yeah, those could be good ones for you. And really, like, just Asian greens are really easy, small and quick yield. You know, 3-4 weeks you could be eating that stuff. Microgreens. A lot of stuff you could be doing with a grow tent, you know.
I did try a cover crop this last year, but it kind of it worried me a little bit there. It just, you know, it's like I said, coming in from cocoa, you know, pests have always been a no-no. You know what I mean? Anything creepy crawl, you don't want that. It's gone. Get it out of there. When I put the cover crop in there, it started to seem to like begin to invite things. And I'm not gonna lie, at that point I was like, I went in there and ripped it all out, just chopped and dropped it all. At that point I'm like, yeah, I'm not ready for bugs. I'm not ready to welcome in pests at this point. But I know it's part. I'm still getting there. I know, I see those eyes. But as I got a ladybug crawling down my back.
Yeah, that's what's up, bro. You are one with the bugs. Yeah,
These two, he's shedding right down the spine of my back, or my spine.
You know, the cover crops, along with any of these companion plants, they really need to be managed and cared for as well. And, you know, they can overgrow stuff. You can have the wrong one in there. I like using things like hairy vetch in the winter when there's no ganja in my bed, but I don't like it in the summer because it's really climby and it wants to climb up on my ganja and tangle up in it. So really, it's you know, making sure that you're clearing any dead ones out of there. You start having dead plants in your greenhouse or unhealthy plants, just like the ganja, they're going to start attracting pests or pathogens. So any plant you bring in there, whether it's a cover crop or your, you know, well tended ganja plant, really needs to be cleaned up if it's got dead foliage on it, if it's got sickly stuff, and managed just like the rest of the grow. So people plant all these companion plants or trap plants, and then they let them get sickly, and then they really turns into an infestation, and then they're really fucked. when they really should have, every few weeks be starting some new companion plants, be starting some new trap plants or some banker plants. The banker plants provide food source for your natural predator bugs, or for the predator bugs that you might be introducing into your tent. So making sure that you have new healthy ones every 3 weeks or so to reintroduce to your grow. So that's some crucial stuff right there. When you start playing with no-till soils and cover crops and all that. One of our Dragonfly Earth Medicine collective family members, Green Life Productions, Steve Cantwell in Vegas, incredible indoor facility where they're on cycle 27 or 28 of their no-till soil beds, and they make all their compost there on site with all the leaf trimmings from their garden. And excuse me, they do a lot of cover crops, and then they do a pot with the bottom cut out of it on top of their bed with their plant growing out of that, and that just kind of keeps some of the cover crops and some of the other plants from encroaching right onto that root ball and right onto that main area where that plant is, and like climbing up it. So that was a cool solution I saw. Those guys do a great job for, those guys are, top notch for indoor production for what they're doing. It is, everybody I see doing indoor, I'm like, why don't you just do what Green Life Production stuff is doing? They're crushing it, producing some of the prettiest weed I've ever seen. I got to smoke a bunch of it with those guys, and it's incredible. And they're doing as clean a job as you could do for indoor. So I'm really stoked to see, people doing that thing. Yeah, just getting that knowledge out there and just showing people that, hey, they're on cycle 27 and crushing it out with minimal inputs. And yeah, there's a handful of people with some incredible regenerative indoors. So let's hope we see more of that action.
Those earth boxes that Smiley had gave me are on there. Well, the one behind me up in the corner there is on its 6th flowering cycle, and with just adding earthworm castings and compost, worm compost as well on top of there, and they've been doing well. But any advice for somebody like me that, as much as I would like to keep like a living bed or keep a pot going like that, any advice for me that's gonna break down them pots and reuse? Uh, any advice for that stages like that? I know breaking it apart and exposing those microbes to the air is bad, but for me in my system, I just don't have the room to keep those pots going from a small plant through flower stages. So I have to kind of up pot, up pot, up pot. So I'd like to kind of reuse that soil and in that type of method. Any suggestions for that type of scenario?
It sounds like you're doing a lot of good stuff. I mean, easy things you can do in your home. Are you guys compost? Do you guys have your own little compost set up?
Not yet. I was gonna crack that door this year, but life kind of threw me a couple twists and turns. I was hoping by this point to have the earthworm bin set up and have started my composting adventure, but 21 threw me a couple of speed bumps, and
Totally.
it's still in the
Totally,
cards,
bro.
but not here.
No. Yeah, we've all got to go at a healthy pace, Like when I help people convert these farms, oftentimes I'm talking them out of all the big things they want to do, and let's scale scale it down to a reasonable amount, and let's take this at a slow pace, and you know, let's convert this a little bit at a time, one pot at a time, one bed at a time, you know, one hoop at a time. So yeah, things like starting a compost pile and a worm bin, those are some really easy things that we could all be doing. Anyone that's got a kitchen could be doing. And getting getting yourself the Humanure handbook and starting a Humanure composting toilet is very easy to do. You literally take a year building your pile and take another year composting it. So, you know, this stuff is 2 years old by the time you're putting it in your garden. So you don't have to worry about it. It is so decomposed at that point. You could be using your urine. I mean, these are really easy things, you know. Using all that leaf, any leaf you're pulling out of your garden, figuring out ways to use that, even if you're just, you know, feeding it to your compost pile or to the worms, or just mulching it right back onto the top of your beds. And once you're making your own compost, you can make really easy compost tea extracts where you're just dunking a little bit of that healthy compost in some water in a tea bag and letting it soak for 10 minutes and applying that to your beds. And when you get that good biology in your beds, those good microbes, you'll be feeding less. It helps aerate the soil, all those good things. So you can get on a routine where you're regularly feeding some good biology to your soil weekly or every other week or even once a month. So I do that every other week on my farm. I'm doing that compost tea dunk, and then on the other week, I'm doing this microbial solution, this Jadam microbial solution that does the same thing, cultures the indigenous microbes in my area. And we grow them in salt water with a little mashed potato and a little of that leaf mold. And the microbes on the leaf mold culture in the water and feed on the starch of the mashed potato. And then we can tell when this is done because of this growth of the bubbles on the top of this container of this microbial solution. So I feed that every other week, and then I feed the compost tea. So it's important to keep those biological levels up in your soil, even if you have to, even if you're growing in something that turns into a root ball every run. Is that your issue more? Is it turns into kind of a root ball by the end of the run? Is that what you're working with?
Yeah, they definitely are hitting the edges and kind of rounding the pots there. But yeah, I just more space. Like I said, because I'm a perpetual harvest, it's hard to keep the numbers in cycle. I guess, in my opinion, from what you guys would like to see, you'd like to see those clones in that 10-gallon pot and live in there, you know. But I just don't have the space for that type of rotation, basically.
Oh, you got to do whatever fits your context, bro. You know what? You know, my perfect setup would be harvesting a feminized autoflower every day, and I would start a seed every day, and then I could just harvest one plant, and then I'd have fresh bud that I could juice. I'd have some weed I could throw in the freeze dryer. I'd have, you know, every day you'd have a nice new plant to harvest. I mean, I love that you've got some perpetual harvest going on over there. That's great. Yeah, that's my fantasy, man. How do we get more of those kind of setups going where everybody can grow some of these feminized autoflowers right in their windowsill, and we can get more Martha Stewart's juicing fresh cannabis every day, you know? You ever juice the fresh leaf?
I have not. I have definitely have heard a lot of good benefits from it, and I've also heard it isn't the best thing, the best taste floating around, but definitely healthy. Is that true? It's just
It's very bitter. Yeah, very bitter. I mean, it tastes like like the wheatgrass shots, if you've ever done a wheatgrass shot. But it's very good for you, and very high in CBD. And if you can juice fresh bud is even better for you. The amount of the cannabinoids you get, and they're unactivated because you're not heating it up. So you can juice a big fresh bud and ingest that. It's really good for you. It's really expensive, which is why hopefully we can get the price to, get the price down for real medicine for people. But yeah, if you could be juicing bud every day, it would be really good for you. Excuse me. I used to have a cannabis doctor I worked with during the 215 days. His name was Dr. William Courtney. He was this amazing cannabis doctor, and that was his fantasy. He was working in Switzerland to bring these feminized CBD strains to market. He was really into juicing, and he was really into juicing the whole bud. That was his big thing, was getting people to juice the whole bud, was having incredible health benefits for people. And but it's a lot of money. Maybe it's not so much anymore. Maybe with prices where it's at, that's what we need for us all to start juicing an ounce of bud every day.
But when you say fresh, are you honestly like saying wet, fresh out of the garden, fresh, or just how fresh is fresh out of the garden?
Fresh. Cut it down and cut it right into the juicer.
It'd be pretty hard the first couple of times, I'm sure.
Yeah, it would be. Well, you can do it with all hemp, get some nice hemp genetics. You don't feel so bad about it. But yeah, give it a try. Even just do it with a couple little buds, and you can just juice your leaf also. Just give it a good rinse, wash off any residue, anything that might have been on there. Just give it a good wash, like any produce that would come out of your garden. You'd want to rinse it,
The people that I spoke with that do juice for like a medical reason, the leaves, have said that, the effects that they noticed were almost instantaneous as far as like teeth, tightening up, harder nails, better digestion. They said it was almost immediate. Within like a week, they've seen positive turnaround, which blows my mind. It really does. That kind of, if you can get that kind of benefit from the leaves, I can't imagine. Again, expensive, but the benefits you would get from, trying to squeeze both the bud and the leaf. Man.
Yeah, absolutely. Right on, brother. This has been a good time, man. I'm falling asleep.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to hang out. Man, it's been another great chat. Everybody said a lot of great things again, just like they did the first time you were on. But before you rush off, tell us where you're going to be next. What are you working on? Where they could look for you, where they could find what you're working on next.
Yeah, well, I just started a Patreon where I'm posting a lot of information, a lot of my SOPs, a lot of the stuff I use in my consulting. And, Instagram really started cracking down on me a couple of months ago, along with a lot of the cannabis community. Started deleting all my posts, sending me messages saying my account's on the verge of being deleted. So I can no longer post an actual photo of a cannabis plant. It gets deleted within seconds. I figured out a couple go arounds, mostly they can't mess with videos. So I'm doing a lot more videos and whatnot. But photos is difficult. So I started the Patreon. I'm posting a lot more over there. I'm shooting a lot more videos. I'm shooting a lot of different farms that I'm going to, that I'm visiting, and that I'm working on and consulting on, and going to be posting over there a lot more and sharing a lot more of my content. I've already had a bunch of people sign up, and got a good little community going. So that's patreon.com/thehumboltlocal. And then my Instagram, the Humboldt Local, and certainly anything I've got coming up, I'll be posting on there. Like I said, my living situation, growing situation, a little up in the air at the moment. I hope to be in. I have no idea. I'm pretty open to whatever the universe has in store for me next, and having a good time working with people and working with farmers, and yeah. Thanks for having me, bro. Total pleasure. Total pleasure. And thanks for fighting the good fight out there in Michigan. I really want to come out there and teach a class in Michigan next summer. Make my way out there and share some of these techniques with you guys.
That would be completely awesome. Sounds like we're feeling a bit of the same bump. To be honest with you, and laugh about it in good spirits. But the way this show ends is a little bit different than the way the organic takeover ends. First, I want to tell you a couple of first I want to tell you one thing. Secondly, I want to ask you for one thing. First thing I'd like to tell you about is please keep this Zoom link. Now that you've done this aspect of the channel, that link is always good for anytime that there's a Weed Nerd World episode, which Monday nights are Weed Nerd Worlds, or any other time that you see Weed Nerd World in the title, that is open to all past guests, in which you are now. So keep the Zoom link anytime that we're on and talking. You no longer need an invitation. You can come and go as you please, as you see fit, good sir. So thank you for donating your time to the show, and hopefully we see you as you see fit, as much as you come and want to come, as much as you want to come and go, good sir. We'd like to have you around. So I'd like to extend that invitation to you.
My pleasure, bro. Yeah, appreciate that.
The second thing I would like to get from you is the little thing I call the sound bite. And basically, it's going to be a commercial. It will at one point be a commercial for this episode. Basically, it's like the old school radio identification when the artist would come on and I'm on such and such channel. Well, it's actually very much like that. My version of it would be like, hey, I'm Eagle and I'm on fucking Talking Shit with Eagle, episode 512. You can say anything you want before or after, as long as it kind of includes that in the body of it. It's the only portion of the show I record, and I am ready now, good sir.
Hey, this is the Humboldt Local, and I've been fucking talking shit with Eagle. Get some. Much love, y'all.
Perfect. Thank you, good sir. Get some rest, and hopefully you will take me up on that invitation to come hang out some night in one of the Weed Nerd episodes. And if not, another spotlight at some point would be pretty awesome as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, brother. Love to come back for sure.
Anytime. Well, guys, that does wrap up this episode 512. Again, thank you very much, Joey, for hanging out, jumping some knowledge on us, and letting us get to know you just a little bit better. And we hope to see you more in the future. For the rest of you guys, thank you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate you guys hanging out. Hopefully, you guys will be filling up that tray, stretching them legs a little bit, and I'll see you in Weed Nerd World in about 20 minutes. So thank you guys very much. You guys know the deal. Random acts of kindness do save lives. Take time to make sure everybody around you is good. We are out of here. Thank you again.